So apparently Sony doesn't see Nintendo as competition, not just in the here and now, but also for the PlayStation 5 and any future endeavors. They're only worried about Microsoft and tangentially worried about Google Stadia, at least in terms of the long-term view. They don't think Nintendo is a threat because of the children. Okay, let's actually go into the grander point here and show you what Sony is talking about. All of this comes from the Wall Street Journal. They did an extensive report, and it's talking about next gen and a whole bunch of different things. But what I want to do the big takeaway here is what they had to say about Nintendo. So it goes off here in somewhat in the middle of the article, and it says Sony sees Microsoft as its main competitor in the next generation, with Google a potential threat to the mid to long term as internet technology advances. One company official said. Okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. Nintendo company isn't perceived as a major rival, the person said. Remember, this is someone who works at Sony, because its main users tend to be younger than PlayStation's core demographic. Now, that's all fine and dandy. I think everybody knows that PlayStation tends to appeal to an older, more mature gaming audience, right? That 16 to 34 range that seems to have a vast majority of gamers in it. But is that actually true? Are they actually appealing to an age group that Nintendo isn't? Well, I have some statistics for you, courtesy of Nintendo themselves. Now, to be clear, these stats come from 2017, so they are out of date for a Nintendo Switch, so that is something to keep in mind. So someone's going to be out there, oh, you just cherry-picked. Look, Nintendo doesn't update these stats very often. They usually give them to you once or twice per generation. But this does give us at least a look at who was buying Switch initially and why is Switch still selling today. All right, so if you actually look at this comes from the first 6-month financial briefing results for fiscal year ending March of 2018, Nintendo Switch. And it says, here is some information on who is purchasing Nintendo Switch. These are the results of an internet survey that was given to consumers in the U.S. market in October who had linked a Nintendo account to their Nintendo Switch system. So basically anyone who's playing online. Please keep in mind that these figures are for the U.S. market only. As you can see, purchases are primarily made by male consumers in their 20s and early 30s. The results also show good interest among consumers from 10 to 19. So if you look at the range here, they get about 20% of their users look like they're between the ages of, I don't know, what is this? I mean, I'm trying to figure this out here. So 12 and under is a small percentage right here. It looks like about 5% maybe, or is that 3%? No, it's 5%. So 5% of their audience is under the age of 12 on Switch. 5% are literal children. Everyone else, presumably past the initial 5% here that are probably 12-year-olds, are ages 13 and up. 13 to ages whatever are the vast majority of Nintendo Switch's audience, according to Nintendo's own stats back in 2017. You're going to tell me, Sony, that this is not your audience? You're going to tell me that Nintendo Switch's audience, primarily living in their 20s and 30s, is not your audience? Now, Sony does not publicly provide statistics on age groups and age ranges for their platform. They might make, say, a blanket statement like this, but they won't tell you what that is. So instead, in a Google search, yes, I used a Google search here to try and figure out what the average age of gamers who play PlayStation 4 is. We just kind of get an average range of gamers in general. And this comes from VentureBeat, and it says 31 years old is the average age of someone who plays game. This is in the United States. More gamers are over the age of 36 than between the ages of 18 to 35, under the age of 18, blah, blah, blah. So, the point is, the average age is 31 years old for gamers in general in the United States. So you're going to tell me that Nintendo's primary audience being in this blue and purple, right here, this makes up, what? How much does this make up? Because this is from ages 16 all the way to 45 and up. So we got 50, 60, and this is like 3. So 63% of the Nintendo Switch audience are old enough to drive and old enough to retire. A vast majority of Nintendo Switch's audience is in the same age group as the PlayStation 4 audience. That's what's so baffling about what Sony's mentioning here. Again, Sony said Nintendo company isn't perceived as a major rival, the person said, because its main users tend to be younger than PlayStation's core demographic. But statistically, that's not actually true. Now, if you want to say because Nintendo isn't competing in the same sort of console space, right? They're not making a box that sits underneath your TV. Fine. You want to say that Nintendo doesn't compete power-wise. Fine. Those are all legitimate arguments. If you say Nintendo is more of a handheld maker, fine. Those are legit arguments. But age demographic is what you're bringing up. And this is ironic, right? Because think about the last video I just made. For those who missed it, you can click on it up here. The video I made is about censorship and Nintendo basically not censoring third-party games. We're not talking about Nintendo censoring themselves. That's a different issue. But Nintendo doesn't censor third-party games. They said, look, that's what the ESRB, SARO, PEGI rating systems are for, and parental controls, right? Nintendo has no will, want, or desire to censor third-party games. Yet we have Sony, who has openly stated that they are going to censor sexualized third-party games because they are worried about appealing to children and families. So Sony is actively trying to appeal to a younger audience. Trying to appeal. Nintendo just does what Nintendo does. Are there children that play Nintendo systems? Yes! I have 2 of those children in my own home. Right? Yes, kids like Mario. They like Zelda. They like Pikmin. They like Mario Maker. Mario Kart, whatever. Splatoon. Yes, children are into these things. Of course they are. But you know what my kids are also into? Sadly, Fortnite. I know children that are my kids' age playing Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed and Madden and NBA 2K. I'm just being honest here. Children play everything. I think we all know this, right? There isn't really, even Devil May Cry 5, right? It doesn't feel like that should be a children game. I know of at least 3 children that I have met that have played Devil May Cry 5. The point is, children play everything that adults also play too. Children just also happen to play some games adults might not play. You know, maybe, I'm trying to think right now, like my son's really into Yoshi's Crafted World, right? I really enjoyed Yoshi's Crafted World, but I can see how a lot of other adults might not be into that one. So there's obviously a demographic of games that, you know, us adults aren't really spending too much time with, but I don't get the argument, because statistically, what Sony is saying isn't actually true, at least in the US. Maybe it's true in Japan, and maybe that's the only market Sony pays attention to. But again, Sony is actively trying to appeal to a younger audience, and then they're going to use the argument Nintendo isn't a competitor to them when Nintendo's apparently appealing to the audience that Sony's trying to appeal to. So wouldn't that, in fact, make Nintendo a direct competitor with the audience you're trying to capture? You've got a little irony here. Your actions are not matching your words, Sony. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stuff in here you guys can go through. I'll put a link to the Wall Street Journal article down below if you would like to check it out and you happen to be a subscriber or you happen to have a guest account like I do. I think I have like 7 days free or whatever from a friend. But I just want to go down here and look at some of the other Nintendo remarks. So some executives at smaller game makers say they have felt snubbed by Sony. So this is obviously like indie devs, right? Some indie devs have felt snubbed by Sony. In contrast to Nintendo, at the Tokyo Game Show in September, Nintendo is supporting events to showcase independent game developers. And we already know this. Nindies, hello. Like, why does that term exist? Why are there showcases? Like, Nintendo very much supports the indie scene. We've known this for a while. Sony used to do similar things, but isn't planning to this year, the first Sony official said. That's right. That's right. Sony used to do little things to highlight indie games. Now, they just don't care. They're doing nothing. I shouldn't say nothing. There's been some indie games in their state of plays, but no indie-specific event, right? This, folks, is also concerning. And it kind of sucks because the developers and publisher behind, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night didn't realize that this is what's happening. Because sales figures came in for Bloodstained Ritual of the Night this past week for the UK, right? So we don't have sales for every place, but we do for the UK. And Bloodstained Ritual of the Night on Nintendo Switch outsold the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions combined. And it's the worst running version of the game. Yeah, of course they're dedicated to fixing it, folks. They have to be dedicated to fixing it because that's their audience. Indie developers are flocking to Switch because we're buying the games. Even when they're not running the greatest, we're buying the games. We're the biggest supporters of indies. Nintendo is one of the biggest supporters of indies. Microsoft does a decent job as well at times too, so credit where credit is due, and Sony has done a good job in the past. But the point is that Nintendo has entire programs and entire advertising mechanisms built in to help indie developers along, and it's working. It's working. People are buying these indie games. And the funny thing is, you know who buys indie games? It's not my son or my daughter. It's not, children. Children are the least likely to be aware that these indie games exist. You know who buys indie games? Adults. Because we're more informed. Because we pay attention to things like Nindy showcases that my children aren't watching. My children know about Mario Maker 2 because there's advertisements for it at Walmart and GameStop. That's how they found out about it. There's advertisements for the games when they watch videos on YouTube or wherever, on TV, right? That they find out about these big games because they're advertised directly to them. They don't find out about these indie games because the indie games are advertised on the internet through methods and ways that Nintendo fans are watching. Nintendo fans that happen to be adults. I don't let my kids just willy-nilly all over the internet. Not at their ages. Will they have free reign eventually? Of course. So the point I'm making is, Sony doesn't seem to understand who they're going up against. And maybe that is why Sony is trying not to concern themselves with Nintendo as a direct competitor. They don't understand who buys indie games, so now they're not even catering to indie games anymore. And then they don't understand why Nintendo is even considered a competitor by some. They are dismissing Nintendo because the audience is, quote-unquote, younger. But it's not. It's honestly not. In fact, one of the leading statistics for Nintendo Switch that exists out there is that something like 40% of the Nintendo Switch audience owns a PlayStation 4. And you're going to tell me, Sony, you're going to look me in the eyes and tell me that Nintendo's not a competitor? Why? Because those 40% also own a PlayStation 4? What about the huge chunk of that 40% that has said since buying a Switch, they play a majority of their games on Nintendo Switch? They spend more of their game time on Switch than on PlayStation 4. Is that not a concern to you, Sony? Are you not worried that even though the PlayStation 5 and the brand new shiny thing coming out with the 4K, 60, 120 FPS, whatever it does, SSD, all that shiny stuff, $400, $500, $600, whatever it ends up costing, well, that's a lot of hype, and I'm excited for that device. I really, truly am. I'm actually holding off on getting a PlayStation 4 right now because I kind of want to get in day one on PlayStation 5. You're telling me that you're not concerned that there might be people that are just happy with their Switches and their Switch Minis and their Switch Pros and just might not be considering upgrading right now until they're no longer happy gaming on the device they're already gaming on more than their PS4? I'm just throwing it out there that Sony's going to be fine, right? They're the market leader for a reason. They've only ever had one generation of home consoles not sell 100 million units, and that was PlayStation 3, which sold 80 million, and that's incredible sales growth, and the PlayStation 5 is going to be just fine. I don't know, is it going to hit 100 million? I have no idea. I don't know if the market's shrinking or the market's growing. It's really hard to tell because Microsoft really botched things, Nintendo botched things with Wii U, so we don't really know where the actual market for home consoles is right now, and obviously we know Google Stadia and other streaming services could actually take a bite into that and change the game. But what I do know is, if Sony doesn't take Nintendo seriously, then I don't know what they've been paying attention to for the last 30 plus years that Nintendo's been in the industry. Nintendo's lasted in this industry and been profitable every single year but two because they know what they're doing. It's not just because they target kids. Do I look like a child to you? I mean, maybe I sound like one. I don't know. Maybe some of you guys think I'm some whiny, entitled gamer brat or whatever you think I am. But I turned 33 this year. I'm pretty sure I'm right in the target audience for PS4, yet I game more on Switch than I do on anything else I have. Why? Not just because I grew up with Nintendo, but because, honestly, they just have games to me that are just more fun sometimes. Not to knock PlayStation 4's library. They have some great, like Death Stranding later this year. Going to be an incredible experience. But, like, that's the only thing on PlayStation 4 I'm looking forward to. I have Mario Maker right now. I have Fire Emblem Three Houses and Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 landing soon. Right? And that's just in the next couple of months. Look at the rest of the year for Nintendo with Luigi's Mansion 3 and Pokemon. Oh, but remember, Pokemon and Luigi's Mansion 3 are family. Remember, it's funny. Luigi's Mansion 3 did win some E3 awards this year, folks. Yes, oh yes, it did. It won some E3 awards. Those awards being Best Casual Fun Game. Well, I think it was Best Casual Family Game or whatever at E3. And I'm just like, since when is Luigi's Mansion 3 casual? Like, what about Luigi's Mansion's ever been casual? Like, it's like the polar opposite of Mario. Like, Mario, I understand why Mario is considered casual, but even then, Mario's not called casual, it's called a platformer. Maybe I don't know. Maybe the industry has it wrong. Maybe the entire industry just assumes Nintendo's for kids. Luigi's Mansion appeals to my children. It's not. They could care less about Luigi's Mansion, but I'm thrilled and looking forward to it as a 30-something. I'm sure many other are Pokemon. Yeah, Pokemon has a nice age demographic, but kids, it also has a huge age demographic. And the college. Look, I don't know who's winning next gen, who's going to sell more units, and I don't even know if we should care. All I know is, if Sony's going to ignore Nintendo, they're going to be in for a rude awakening. Because I don't think Switch is going anywhere. They have a 10-year deal with Nvidia. That means we're going to at least have a decade worth of Switch goodness coming up. And if it keeps going well, that might last longer and longer and longer as Nvidia continues to make some new exclusive tech for Nintendo down the line. I'm just saying, Sony, you might not want to ignore, one, the demographic that you're trying to get into and claiming Nintendo already has, and two, ignoring the fact that Switch is actually playing in the same realm that you are. Yeah, it's not matching you on power. Yeah, it's not that under TV device, and you can make all those cross arguments you want. But guess what? They're all fighting for the same time with the same gamers. So is Microsoft. So is Google. Everyone's fighting for the same time with the same audience. Best not ignore it. All right, folks, I'm Nathaniel Novajans from Nintendo Prime. Thanks for tuning in. Leave your comment down below. Drop a like. Share this video with your friends. Let's grow the Nintendo Prime Nation. You Primers out there, I'm so glad that you are with me, that you've joined me, that you enjoyed this work, and I will catch you guys in the next video.